Hello everybody, welcome to another video. It's ya boy, Voidmaster. So, last time, which could either be a day ago or 8 years ago, depending on when I post this video, I made a scenario about what if every country went to war, and that took place 5 years after the war began. I got a suggestion from one of my main fans and someone I know in real life to make this into a series, so here we are. This is 10 years into the future, and we'll just do 15, 20, 25, going up by 5 years until we reach one country winning. Just for the record, this is saying that countries don't collapse from, revolts unless they're really, lost their capital and lost most of their population and economic sectors. So, the US or India or China is not going to collapse to rebels. This is also saying that every country goes into total war and cannot stop or surrender, until the entire thing's over. Now, to be fair, if the scenario did end, realistically, it would end in a stalemate. But we're just gonna go until we get an eventual winner. So, without further ado, this is the updated map. Now, the first thing you notice is it doesn't look that different. Well, you have to remember, this is gonna be a very slogged and drawn-out war. At this point, all countries are tired, and most of the weak countries that you can take to get a bunch of land are, gone. So, we're gonna do the same thing, start in the west, go east, and then I guess boomerang back to Africa once we're done with Oceania. Starting in North America, the US has expanded significantly. They have expanded their reach into this Canadian occupation zone. They've taken control over Iceland, and they have, most importantly, taken over not only Mexico, but also a bunch of the Northern Caribbean. You also can't see it on this map, but they have done a bunch of naval combat. They pretty much have control over the entire Pacific and a bunch of the Atlantic. Moving on to South America, we have only 3 states. For one, Peru is gone. Colombia is looking very weak right now. They've lost a bunch of their stuff to America, and even Brazil has taken a bite out of them. Argentina has taken some losses to Brazil, but gained some from Peru. And Brazil, despite losing land to America, is looking very beefy and is probably going to be the winner of the South American front before, America probably takes it over. So America, or the US, I guess, is still winning in the Western world. That is not going to change. And at this point, there is, no way that America doesn't win in the Americas. Or I guess the US. So, next we have Europe, which is certainly different, but not as different as you might expect. And that's just because I didn't know how radical I wanted to be with the scenario, so I decided to be more moderate. Starting in the west, Spain has lost Catalonia to France, but has gained a bunch of African territory. Moving over to France, they have expanded even more in all directions. Britain has lost Iceland, but they have pretty much just destroyed Sweden now. Speaking of Sweden, they also lost land to Finland, who is alive still, mostly because Russia is struggling in other fronts. We'll get to that later. Moving to Central Europe, Germany and Austria are both on their last legs. They'll probably be out within the next 2 years, so when we get to episode 3, they're probably not going to exist anymore. Italy is also not looking great. They've lost land in Europe and Africa and haven't really gained much of anything in Europe, or not in Europe. They lost land in Europe and Africa, and they haven't gained much in the Balkans. Moving over to the Balkans, this was actually less confusing than it was the first time, which is probably the only region that was so. Just because I could just be this is a lot less realistic, so I didn't have to worry as much about, the politics and stuff. Because, at this point, the scenario, there's no realism left, so really we just gotta go by what we have, which is the 5-year scenario, and that's what this is based off, a continuation of that scenario, not a new scenario 10 years in the future. Moving to the east, Russia has, taken Ukraine, but has failed to make it farther and even lost land to Poland, and actually a bunch of other states. We'll get to that later. And that is Europe. Overall, not actually that different, but there is certainly changes. Moving on, the Middle East, as you can see, I took my own advice and just ignored this western region, and by ignored, I mean partitioned. So the biggest winner of this 5-year time skip in the Middle East was definitely Turkey. They've taken land from everybody, and they haven't actually lost anything. Iran has gained land from Russia, Afghanistan, and Saudi Arabia, but has lost land to Turkey, and Saudi Arabia has lost land to both Turkey and Iran. Afghanistan, as you can see, is gone, either partitioned or there's a tiny bit of rebels left. Central Asia, as you can see, Russia has lost a lot of control. Yeah, you can thank China for that. Now, let's move on to India. India has not changed too much, but they've certainly expanded. Their border with China, barely changed at all. There's a tiny region here, but that's it. And they've taken land from Iran, that's my bad. And they've taken land from Thailand. But yeah, India is still in a very good spot for the next decade or so. But we'll see what happens in the next scenario. Thailand, on the other hand, is not in a good position for the future. They have lost land to literally every single one of their neighbors, and are now really just in, modern Thailand, even probably less than that in some cases. Vietnam has grown, and is looking pretty beefy. They've almost remade Indochina, except they've lost the north to China. Speaking of China, I guess we should talk about China. They have expanded even more. They've took more of Afghanistan. They took a bunch of Central Asia from Russia. They've actually just straight up just taken a bunch from Russia. They took a bit from Thailand, a tiny bit from India, a tiny bit from Vietnam, and finally they took Japan's portion of Korea. Yeah, China is, gigantic right now. Even more than in the last scenario. Moving on to Japan, they have lost Korea, but in exchange, I guess, they gained this tiny bit of Russia and the North Philippines. You can see there's a line between the Philippines, that's because its northern bit is Japan, and the southern bit is Indonesia. There was really no good way to do this, so that was the best way I could think of showing you who owns what. Speaking of Indonesia, they are doing, fine. They've lost their land in New Guinea to Australia, but they have gained the Philippines, the south of the Philippines, and Malaysia. Moving on to Oceania, Australia has just taken New Guinea. Not much to see here, but they have lost a lot of naval strength to the US and China. And probably Japan and Indonesia. Moving on to Africa, this is probably the continent with some of the bigger changes, especially looking at Nigeria, but we'll get to that in a sec. Egypt has pretty much stalemated with Ethiopia, but they helped just destroy Chad, and they have kicked back Algeria and the rebels, or the whatever these are in this gray region, back a good amount. So yeah, Egypt is probably either first or second strongest on the continent right now. Algeria hasn't really changed apart from their loss to Egypt, but they are starting to really struggle. Now, you might think it's weird that Mauritania is here instead of Mali, but really, if you think it should be Mali, this can be Mali. It could be either, I don't really know, but yeah, one of the two takes control of this region. Moving on, we have Nigeria. Remember when I said I could have made them take all of West Africa? Yeah, they pretty much did that. They took out the gray rebels in this region, as well as Equatorial Guinea. They also just destroyed Senegal. They are now absolutely gigantic, either biggest or second biggest on the map. Well, on Africa, anyways. There's obviously bigger in Asia and the Americas. But yeah, next we have Ethiopia, who has really just slightly expanded. They're doing fine though. No worries. The Congo, on the other hand, is not doing fine. They are struggling. They're barely holding on to their own stability and their own country, to be honest. This is unlike Tanzania, who is, just like Ethiopia, doing just fine. They've lost some land to Ethiopia, but they've also gained land in a bunch of other spots. And yeah, they're still just the East African powerhouse. Angola, on the other hand, they're not dying like the Congo, but they're certainly doing worse than most of the states around them, like Tanzania or South Africa. So yeah, they've pretty much, they have shrunk. They took a bit of an L from South Africa, but they're pretty much in the same spot they were before, just a little smaller. Madagascar is still chilling, just because there's, again, no one wants to take them, but they don't have the strength to invade anyone else. And finally, South Africa has solidified their control over the southern tip of the continent. So yeah, that is the new scenario. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember, this one is even more insane than the last one. I said there were potentially tens of thousands. Now there's probably millions of scenarios. Last time you needed to take a whole truckload of salt. This one, it's an entire cargo ship. But anyways, this was, again, just for fun. I would like to thank, I think it's Ghost Dude 475 for giving me this video idea. And, yeah, I guess I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.